Hi, this is Broadcasting Scotland at 7, and it's Tuesday the 18th of June 2019. I've got a guest with me today. He's Gary Patterson, and he's going to go through the various news stories we've got. And we met Gary a few weeks ago in the Glasgow University. And I beg your pardon, the Strathclyde University, which is in Glasgow. So I don't know if I was too far wrong or not far wrong there. Anyway, there's lots of different news stories to talk with Gary about. And the first one is quite an interesting one. The YouGov people have done a poll of Conservative Party members. And it seems that of 26% of people polled in the survey would be absolutely happy if Scotland were to leave the Union of Northern Ireland, Wales and England. It goes on really in a way that's quite extraordinary. 54% of Tory party members polled would be prepared to break up their own party for Brexit. So they want Brexit more than they want to keep the Tory party together. Only 36%, about a third, would put the party above leaving the UK from breaking up the UK from leaving the EU. Then it goes on. Asked if it were willing to avert Brexit, it would be if they were to avert Brexit to avoid Scotland leaving and Northern Ireland leaving the UK. 63% said they would be happy if Scotland would just go away and so they could have Brexit instead. Contrasting that, 59% of people would be happy to see Northern Ireland go for the sake of Brexit. Unusually, though, there's a little twist in the tale. The only thing that these people will be happy to see so they don't have Brexit. It's so complicated, isn't it? Brexit. They don't want Brexit if Jeremy Corbyn were to get the keys to number 10 Downing Street. So 51% would call the whole thing off and revoke Article 50 if they saw Jeremy Corbyn walking up Downing Street with the keys in his hand. Yeah, so I've got a little bit more. I'm going to let you speak in a minute, I promise. Yes. Yeah. Well, maybe you should speak about all that lot, because there's another little tailpiece to that that's going to come up in a minute. Go on, tell me what you think.
Well, I think it's quite interesting. It's to see that the dysfunctional character of the Conservative leadership and the Conservative government really is throughout the whole party. So it's a kind of root and branch disaster kind of capitalism.
Because they are the Unionist Party, aren't they? The Unionist Party. They keep going on about the Unionist Party.
Well, I think that's more of their priority in their messaging up here. But it's really quite clear that in terms of the wider membership of the party, the main concern, it seems to be for the majority, is to pursue a kind of hard Brexit. It certainly puts paid to any suggestion that there's going to be some sort of compromise for Scotland. I think we've known that for some time now as well. But it's very clear that in this leadership election that the membership of the Conservative Party don't have any interest in relation to what Scotland wants when it comes to Europe, and the vision of a kind of Singapore-style low-tax, low-wage economy with kind of disaster capitalism opening up the regulation books. This seems to be the hard neoliberal perspective that the membership of the Conservative Party are pushing for, and it's entirely incompatible with Scotland. So it only adds to further divergence really with the rest of the UK. The thing about the Corbyn point in that survey is the only standout as well. I think if you were to speak to that portion that said that only in that scenario they wouldn't pursue a hard Brexit, I think
they pursue Brexit, full
they
stop.
would still. I think they would still pursue some form of Brexit, and of course, the definition of hard Brexit has moved so much in the last few years. I remember in 2016, the definition of hard Brexit, certainly for me anyway, would have been, being in the customs union alone. That's akin to what Turkey has. They're absolutely not in the single market. So to me, that would have been a hard Brexit. But now the definitions have moved so much. So I think if you were to interrogate that...
What I was trying to say to you a little bit, when I said there was a caveat to that. You see, 52% of people believe that Brexit with a deal will ensure that the Conservative Party win the next election, and a further 10% think that they will have a domino effect, so they win subsequent elections. Contrasting that, 44% of the Tory people who were surveyed in this thing think that a no-deal Brexit will secure them the next election. And 14% think that will domino into a future wins for them.
Well, they're not particularly ambitious numbers. They're not very confident numbers, I have to say. Nobody can predict what's going to happen, even past October at this point. So, of course, they have to be optimistic that they think they're going to win future elections. But for example, the only one there that you've highlighted that comes out in a majority is Brexit with a deal. Well, we're still being told that there's going to be some sort of renegotiation of the deal, even though the EU has made it very clear that this is the deal that's been agreed. It's on the table. It's been agreed by the 27 member states.
It's been signed off by the former Prime Minister.
It's been signed off, and this is what the UK asked for. It's getting what it wants. So within that, I don't know how. I think the period that they've got up until the 31st of October, there is a recess. They've taken a big long summer holiday, which to me seems bizarre.
Yeah, when Donald Tusk told them not to waste their time.
Yeah, well, they said that the time was precious and to act on it, so we've got a huge recess period. We've got a party conference season as well. Actually, Phantom Power put out a really good graphic today, which showed that it was actually only 10 working days until the UK is expected to return to the European Council, just a week and a half before the actual formal Brexit date.
So they've run down the time again. And what's actually happened is they've shifted the whole thing away from the European Union altogether. This is now within the Tories and within the party that Farage leads. They've shifted it to this, or we want our democracy.
For the last number of years, this has been a conversation within the Tory party, which the whole nation is having, but we're on the fringe of it. We're not in the Tory party, so we're just waiting for them to decide what they're going to do.
And they are. What do you think about waiting for them? Because the next item we're going to deal with is, of course, the Tory party leadership. We've got a little bit before we get that far. But what do you think about the fact that they can have all this mayhem and then elect somebody else within their own ranks to be the next Prime Minister, who is in overall charge of the United Kingdom, which at the moment Scotland is a part of?
Well, it's really no different for the long-term issue that we've had in this so-called United Kingdom. It's not a union, it is a union in name only. Incidentally, if the union was based on compromise, we say that there isn't really much compromise in British politics. If it was a union of nations in the way that the EU as a supranational entity is, then there'd probably be people in other parts of the UK a long time ago calling for the end to that union. So the UK is not based on compromise in general from my perspective as someone who's an independence activist. And it doesn't really matter what shade of blue we're going to have in number 10. I think we know that we're still going to have a Tory party that doesn't fully believe in devolution. It doesn't want, obviously, Scotland to be independent, and it's trying to force exit from the EU, which this country didn't vote for. So from a Scottish perspective, for me anyway, I was just sitting looking at these elections, and I don't really think there's a vast difference between whether or not it's Boris or Jeremy Hunt. I make sure I say that right. There's issues on the telly with that recently, or whoever. We know that we're still going to have the same approach in relation to Scotland, and we're still enduring after 10 years of austerity, which you could pick so many stories, everything from Grenfell to Universal Credit. The people that are really struggling day by day underneath the whole Brexit show. The last 10 years of disaster politics of the Tory party in charge really does need to come to an end for Scotland at some point soon.
Well, for those people who watch Broadcasting Scotland at 7 frequently, or catch us up on the catch-up service, you'll know that Keith Brown, the deputy leader of the SNP, is a guest of ours on frequent occasions. He said today that the Tory party has clearly gone off the deep end with their Brexit obsession, pushing the party further towards extremes. Tory party members are so determined to deliver a damaging Brexit, they are happy to watch our economy collapse and open the door of number 10 for Nigel Farage to take control of the UK. What do you think of that?
Yeah, the whole thing about Nigel Farage I think is really interesting, because one of the main reasons why we're actually in this whole Brexit mess in the first place is that the Tories were terrified of losing a handful of seats to UKIP. Ironically, as we now sit here 4 years down the line, we see polling where the latest iteration of UKIP, the Brexit party, is coming in at a significant number. So we may very well still end up with Farage in the House of Commons, which seems to be the Tories' nightmare, and then still have Brexit alongside
Can he be
it.
in the European Union Parliament and Westminster at the same time? He can.
Yeah, I'm sure he can, but regardless, he probably would take a bit of a pay cut. That might be a factor for him, but I think he's made it clear in the past that his preference would be Westminster. Yeah, potentially, yeah. I think he's indicated in the past, though, that his preference would be Westminster. And it does look quite interesting that the latest iteration of the Tory party's kind of move to the extreme kind of right, that it's not so, at least in the here and now, it's not so bizarre to think of Nigel Farage being offered some sort of role within the UK government, such as the way that, the Tory membership, the Tory MPs and the government in general is continuing to edge towards kind of the hard right and hard Brexit approach.
Yeah, well, talking about the hard right and the hard Brexit approach, well, let's go through this, because the Tory party have been in Westminster today voting on the second round of their things to try and find a new leader. We've already had several people drop out, well, not get enough votes to stay in, let's put it that way. Esther McVeigh was one of those, Andrea Leadsom, Mark Harper, the former Chief Whip, and Matt Hancock, the current Health Secretary. Today, Dominic Raab had to leave the thing because he got 30 votes, up by 10%, but he's out of the race because he didn't get enough to... He had to get 33 votes, so he needed another 3 to get into that. So we've got some people left, and how do we read this out? Let me have a think. We've got Sajid Javid. My tongue is slipping over the word. I beg his pardon. He's to 33. He's up to 33, and you've got 10 more. That's 11%. So he's just got in. He's just at the bottom rung of the ladder. If he hadn't got 30, if he got 32, he wouldn't be there anymore. What do you make of Sajid Javid? Sajid.
Well, he is Home Secretary. He's I don't think there's actually been a lot to say about Sajid Javid anyway, but he seems to be the favourite of Ruth Davidson, even though there doesn't appear to be any Tory MPs who have backed him. That might have changed in the last few hours, but certainly at the last reading it seemed to be only Ruth Davidson herself, who of course, despite being the leader of the Conservatives in Scotland, the country of Scotland, she doesn't have a vote in...
That's interesting, isn't it? That because when Philippa Whitford was here a few days ago, she said that the Tory party is the Tory party, whether it's in England or Scotland. She also said that the Labour Party was the Labour Party, whether it's there's no. If you go to the Electoral Commission, you won't find a Scottish Tory party or a Labour Tory party, a Labour Party. So of Scotland. So how does that work then?
Well, they're technically Scottish sections of the UK-wide party. So yes, they are registered as UK-wide parties, and those are Scottish sections.
Yeah, all those fellas and young ladies and women and everybody came up from the Tory party, didn't they, to support Ruth in a Tory party conference just a few weeks ago. So what if they've got nothing to do with the Scottish Tory party, why do they bother to come up?
Well, I just think it's so interesting. If Ruth Davidson's so wonderful, why don't they give her a say in who the next leader of the Conservative
Wasn't the talk
Party
about
would be?
her becoming the leader of the whole lot?
Well, clearly that's moved on, so we'll just have to wait and see how that
Well,
goes.
let's move on from Mr. Javid. So let's see who got the next up. We got 41, I beg your pardon, 37. Now, this is an interesting result, actually, because Rory Stewart has actually been going out and he's got notoriety by the way he's been running his campaign. I think he took some selfie videos of him, talking to people, and he's been going around rattling cages. He actually managed to purloin, I know that's the wrong word, he managed to get funding of £10,000 from somebody just recently, and we did question that the other day in one of our programmes, but we won't go into that again. But he's got 37. He's got 37, and that's up by 18 pitches. So he's got 12%. And, of course, if the other guys drop out, chance that he might be the runoff candidate, might he?
Potentially. One thing I'll say about the Rory Stewart video is that I find quite amusing, but maybe it's just because I do some photography and stuff. But they're fake selfies, and I don't understand why that needs to be the case. But
what do you mean by fake?
So he has someone who is filming the thing
for
him.
See. So he's pretending to hold his arm out.
He's kind of pretending to hold his arm out, and
but someone's actually over the camera.
He made a light joke of it himself, but he does the whole kind of hand action and stuff. So it's kind of it shows that kind of a bit uncool, but trying to be cool.
On the other hand, when you make television. It's a bit like that one where the snakes were after the iguana, and they put a different iguana on the rock. I mean, television is television.
So Rory is probably the only one that's tried to make some sort of a motive case for the union. I think the rest of them have had this approach of, sit down and we'll tell you how it's going to be run. And he's the only one that, without adding anything substantial, I have to say, but just, his is the only one where the messaging has been a bit like, oh, well, my dad was, Scottish, and I feel Scottish and English. That's the best that we're going to get out of this leadership election.
Because David Liddington came out for him yesterday, didn't he?
Yeah, I think
the day before.
I think one of the things that a lot of people seem to like about him is that he is quite disarming. And he does have a bit of a kind of personality. But I think someone like Rory Stewart, if he was in a position, I don't expect to see Prime Minister Rory Stewart, but if he was, I think he would get absolutely destroyed by, the backbenchers that took May.
There's a charismatic issue in these things, isn't there? Because, so many politicians, I don't know, remember John F. Kennedy? I mean, he got there, on the back of a lot of different things, but the charisma still lives today. He died in 1963, didn't he? Yeah. But I can tell you exactly where I was when he died. I remember it distinctly. I mean, maybe I'm older than you.
I've got a short memory, I'm afraid.
But it's there are certain people, of course.
I think it's really important, though, don't forget that Boris at one point was one of those kind of lovable buffoons, and he was the "Have I got news for you" comedy character, and we go down 10 years down the line, and the comedy character, there's not so many laughs anymore.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Rory Stewart, and he's got a kind of a different kind of charisma, is what I was going to try and say to you. Because it's not the kind of charisma that you go, oh yeah, but it's the kind of charisma, oh yeah.
Well, that was the phrase I used, disarming, to some extent, and almost. It depends, how much is kind of disarming also inspiring, and how much would people kind of get around them.
Let's leave Rory. We've done him quite a lot of good, I think, or maybe not a lot of good at all.
I'm surprised he's still in it. I didn't think he was going to be here at this stage, so perhaps more people will coalesce around him. I'm not sure he would get to the end, though.
Anyway, 41's the next deal, and 41 up by 13%, Michael Gove.
Yeah.
That's what you've got to say.
I think Gove is kind of like mini-me for Boris. He's kind of the package of Boris, but a little bit less kind of the character that was created on Have I Got News for You. I think it would be interesting to see how far he goes into it, but I think if he was to drop out, there's a good potential that a lot of his votes would go towards Boris and would further strengthen his position, which seems to be really in a strong place. I think it's becoming harder to imagine him not being in the final two.
Yeah.
And some people might say, well, of course he was always going to be in it from the start, but the difference here is that as these people drop off and they hold on to their numbers of 30, 40 potentials, that they might take them and everybody coordinates to, make sure that Boris wouldn't be in the vote. So try to, whoever the opposition will be to Boris, if enough people could pull together those votes and try to isolate him from the top two, then Boris will not be sent out to the party members. And that's when you might actually see, there was some talk last year of a supposed SNP civil war. You might see a Tory civil war if we don't actually have Boris on the ballot, because it is quite clear, I think even strengthened by the quite bizarre findings from the YouGov poll, that the Conservative Party are really quite content to see their own party, the country's economy, and of course Scotland along with it, burn to deliver this hard Brexit.
So let's move on then to the next one. He's got 46, up by 3. It sounds like the pop charts, doesn't it, really? And so he's got 15%. But Mr. Hunt didn't make any friends the other day. My pronunciation of sometimes is a bit off, but Culloden, he missed that one entirely, didn't he?
Yeah, I think it was really ham-fisted, and there was some people made jokes better than I could, but it was like, give me an area of Scotland that rhymes with Canary Wharf, like Culloden, not quite, and also the connotations as well. I think just shows a real lack of understanding.
On the crass side,
but in terms of Jeremy Hunt as well, I think one thing that's really interesting about him is people might remember a few years back that he almost was removed from the government, and he managed to hold himself into a position. But this is someone who's managed to operate under the radar for many years within the government, and he's kind of slowly advanced himself through these different positions. Obviously, he was NHS secretary for quite some time for England, and then the foreign secretary as well. So I think it's quite representative of some skill that he seems to have in kind of bubbling under the water and holding himself into a position. And I think that could manifest itself in the actual outcome of the election, that he might be the one that could slip in under the radar, if anyone might be a kind of figure that might be able to bring in the anti-Boris votes. So I still think there's a chance that Jeremy Hunt could end up as Prime Minister, and it would be a kind of shock outcome. But
okay then, well, the fellow who's out in front by a good nose and a furlong is Boris Johnson, former Foreign Secretary. 126 votes so far, up by 12 this time. So that's 40%. Your turn to speak. Or have we just struck you dumb?
Well, I think the whole nation are probably holding their breaths at the moment. So
that's good.
it is really interesting, the way that he has managed to pull himself right into the front, because you would think that the Conservative MPs would pause to think about what the actual impact would be of bringing Boris Johnson to this so-called precious union that they're supposedly so in favour of maintaining, yet they're going for the option which brings, I think, probably the most distaste in Scotland, and that probably says a lot about what they think about Scotland, and says a lot about actually as well for the Tory party. This is Ruth Davidson, who had said that she couldn't support Boris. You've got David Mundell, who said that he couldn't serve in a Boris government, and I think it's quite telling as well what they think of the Scottish Conservatives, that they're putting them in this really difficult position as well, and that they're bringing in this leader which many of their, if you want to call them leading lights, have spoken out against.
Do you think there'd be any chance that might push the Tories in Scotland to break away and form their own group and turn away from the... Well,
I find it quite interesting. I think maybe the Tories are taking a leaf out of George Galloway's book, where it's independence for everyone but Scotland. But they, it's just ironic that they're considering to go independent from the Conservative bloc themselves, and it's been mooted that if Boris was to be the man in charge, that they would potentially do that. I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility.
Certainly many people we spoke with on Broadcasting Scotland at the Oban All Under One Banner March on Saturday expressed the opinion that if Boris became the Prime Minister, that was a good push forward for the independence movement.
Yeah, just on the last point there as well about whether or not the Conservative Party breaks away. It might change things in terms of Holyrood and how they operate in Holyrood, but make no doubt about it that when those Conservative MPs go down to London, regardless of what the relationship is between those two entities, they will be whipped into line and they'll be told to do whatever the Prime Minister or whatever the Conservative leader down south wants. So I don't think that they'll be independent in any meaningful sense. In terms of Boris being Prime Minister and how that affects the independence argument, I think any of the contenders, and that is for the whole bunch that were there at the start, I think we were talking about 12 or something, I think any of them in place, if they continue to press the argument that Scotland has to accept a Brexit that it didn't vote for, and seek to remove powers from the Scottish Parliament, to push on us a political outcome that we don't want, and some of the actual policy outcomes that are at risk in terms of Brexit, with the potential of deregulation when it comes to food safety standards, etc. Like, this movement towards a more neoliberal, extreme neoliberal economy is absolutely not wanted in Scotland. So I think Boris probably, it's more of an impact, I'd say. But any of them, if they're going to push that model, they're really putting their so-called precious union at peril. So for us, in terms of the independence movement, I think we just need to continue to keep building that case on the ground, and as the developments continue up until October, we'll have a clearer picture of where we are. It will be hopefully finally a chance to put this issue to bed, which is by go for independence.
There's one little question that's come to my head about how many in that ERG group down in Westminster,
I don't know the precise numbers, but it's
I was just wondering how many voted for Boris out of that group. Is it the whole lot?
Yeah, I think they're between Rab, Gov and Boris, I would have thought, but they're quite a substantial number within that,
Yeah. Well, for you at home, I don't know if you're interested, but you might be. Boris Johnson is taking part in a BBC debate at 8 o'clock this evening. That's 2000 hours. And meanwhile, the new BBC Scotland channel has come under attack in the papers this week for its low viewing figure. Was the channel set up to fail, is the question.
I think it's interesting. I read something, I can't remember where it came from. Actually, it was a lecturer in Edinburgh who's a former director or something similar at BBC Scotland, and they kind of gave their contribution on Twitter, which was to say, it just goes to show that you shouldn't take direction from political parties on TV channels, and the theory that he was propagating was that the SNP demanded the creation of the BBC Scotland channel. And I think what he actually means is that a high number of citizens in Scotland are dissatisfied with the output of the BBC. That was not to say that there should necessarily be, a channel created somewhere in the back of the digital selection options, but to say that the content that goes out from BBC Scotland in the main should be better reflective of the discourse in Scotland, which the independence argument is a high side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what about this 9 o'clock news thing that they have, the 9?
I've watched a few episodes of it. I don't have any personal issues myself. Maybe it would be better if the main output on the main channel would be more reflective of that style of news. I don't know what the step forward is for BBC Scotland, for the channel and for the corporation itself, but clearly they're going to have quite a challenge, I think, to to continue to maintain a channel which has such low numbers. So whether or not they'll come under increased scrutiny from from HQ down in London. The BBC, of course, was in the media for another reason in the last week, which was about the TV licence as well. The Tories have shifted that responsibility onto the BBC and asked them to fund the TV licence for elderly citizens. So there's clearly a huge financial burden now on the corporation, and easy targets like the BBC Scotland channel will surely be brought up. And I think if the people that are involved in that network, in terms of that guy from Edinburgh who has this theory that it was an SNP demand to create this channel, if that is the genuine kind of viewpoint, then I find it really difficult to see how that's going to survive.
Of course, there have been quite a lot of scandals, and Keith Brown has been quite heavy on his responses to the lack of balance, would that be the word, of people on that Question Time programme they have on the other BBC, and the amount of balance. I mean, it's not just a matter of the number of minutes one gets to speak, is it? It's.
I have so many issues with Question Time as a concept, and this is someone who, I'm a political geek. I used to watch Question Time all the time, like a geek for that kind of stuff. But there has been a shift, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. There was some new people that were brought in. The main person that's involved with organising the show, they said that they want a high adrenaline discussion. This was supposed to be part of political discourse. It's supposed to be educating and informing the public, having that platform to talk about the issues. I know that might not necessarily be exciting TV figures, but that's really an important outcome of a public service broadcaster, which the BBC is. And this kind of punch and judy politics, in which of course the SNP are very rarely represented, or indeed any Scottish parties, occasionally they will bus up to Scotland and go to some random town which tends to not be reflective of the Scottish polity at large. I think the most recent episode they managed to find a kind of a hard Brexit audience, of course an anti-independence in the main audience, and I think it was Leslie Riddick's article, which I thought was really good, which she basically seemed to, she posed the question, is it that Question Time couldn't put a Scottish audience that's more reflective of the Scottish polity, because it would simply not wash for the UK-wide audience, and it would really not be reflective of the more adversarial, aka unproductive punch and judy politics that we see.
And there was that other awful
UK.
incident with Fiona Hislop, wasn't there, where it was almost an ambush. She sat there.
Incidentally, I think if you compare it with the other product, which is based in Scotland, Debate Night, it doesn't seem to produce the same outcomes, which to me probably verifies Leslie Riddick's point of view, or the question that she posed, that Question Time really is built for a kind of UK-wide audience, which means it's built for the political discourse in England. So I really just don't watch the programme. I think it doesn't do anything to inform. I think it is just, as they've marketed it themselves, it's high adrenaline politics. I think we need a bit more actual information and discussion, though whenever we do see someone from our movement there, I do feel that we at least get a flavour of what it would be like more often if one of the largest parties in the UK was actually more accurately represented.
Well, shall we move on to some other subjects of the
Sure.
news today? This is a very fine story, really. Education, of course, in Scotland was... what was it, about 1669 or something, was it? It was Thomas Aikenhurst, isn't that, from after him, and there was all those things. But they definitely started schooling around about that sort of time for every school, every area of Scotland, and the public libraries were brought in at the kind of same time. So education in Scotland has always been of premier importance. But obviously, when you live in a different economic sphere, there can be difficulties in giving, allowing young people to access everything and taking full advantage of what's available. But there's a good story here. There's a record high for young people in positive destinations, they call it. I suppose that means they get something out of it, whether it's university or a job or whatever, maybe further education perhaps. But Yeah, but I suppose there might be other definitions of that. They might just be happier in their lives, but the destinations, as far as this is concerned, I'm sure is to do with education and jobs, etc. But anyway, it says here that official statistics published today show that 93.2% of school pupils had a positive destination 9 months after leaving school. Sounds good?
You know, with the noise of Brexit, there is so much, even within our own government, the Scottish government, that perhaps we're not fully aware of what's been happening. You know, when we look at Brexit as well, we've been talking about this for 3 going on 4 years, and that's the main of this recent parliamentary term. And the agenda that's been taken forward by the Scottish government has, you know, been extremely positive from my perspective. There's been a huge equalities drive, which has, you know, been the kind of one of the hallmarks of Nicola Sturgeon's leadership as First Minister. There's been a huge amount of work that's been done over the last few years on what we call widening access to further and higher education, and that's getting more people from disadvantaged backgrounds or underrepresented groups as well into study. Some of the benefits of that are things like the bursaries for care experienced students, so people that have been in some form of care in their childhood, and that has continued to increase, and I hope it will be expanded as well. And we've seen in other areas things like the carers provision being increased as well, and you know, the key word as well is being defended, because these are all policy areas. Education, for example, these are all areas that are being cut at Westminster, and the Barnett consequentials mean that the share of that funding which is given to Scotland is also cut. So you know, within youth and education, I think there's always more that can be done. I know that, like, as a former vice president of the NUS, like there's always kind of
National Union of Students. Yes.
Yeah, there's always more work that can be done to try and broaden out the support that's available for students, and I'm supportive of that. But you know, I think we have an amazing statistic in Scotland in that we are one of the highest in Europe for youth employment. Our youth unemployment rate is really, I think it's only bested by one other country. You know, that's out of the 28 member states, and Scotland has one of the lowest rates of youth unemployment. I think that's testament to the work of this government, and it just shows that underneath the kind of bubble of Brexit, there is still a lot of work to try and give young people, you know, opportunities to get ahead and you know, build the future of our country.
Yeah, I'll tell you what John Swinney said about it, shall I?
Yeah, go for it.
He said more young Scots are studying, training or working within 9 months of leaving school than ever before. Importantly, that includes more young Scots from the most deprived communities, with the gap closing significantly over the last decade. I'm also particularly pleased to see the proportion of looked after children entering further and higher education is at a record high. I suppose when they say looked after, I think that means that children have been in care.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, is it your personal experience? I mean, I don't suppose people at university go around telling you if they've been in care or not.
Well, the funny thing is, I'm care experienced myself, and that's actually quite a broad definition. You know, we were talking earlier today about some of the different definitions of care experience, and it's not just what you would kind of imagine of this stereotype of, you know, like some sort of care home or something, but that's everything from like foster care to, you know, even being under like estate supervision and being looked after at home. So, you know, there's a huge amount of work that's been done in relation to...
So you're actually speaking to us now with first-hand knowledge.
You know, because I also took a sabbatical during my term, my academic years. I was for 2 years. I was a sabbatical officer at Strathclyde. I've seen a huge amount of difference just within even the last 7 years. So the last year I've been working, but for the 6 years beforehand, I'd done obviously a 4-year undergraduate degree. I was at college 2 years prior, and I had a 2-year sabbatical where I was in the student union. So the things like the care experience grant and stuff, that's coming at the other half. So when I returned back to study, I was able to get that kind of support. And one of the things I think is most crucial of it is then there's a summer component for the care experience grant. You know, it's a huge amount of time between we have graduations on just now, and the next classes will not be till September, and the student funding doesn't necessarily cover you over that summer period. One of the great things that's covered in that Care Experience grant is some support towards housing, because there's a huge presumption that you'll get funding and help from your parents. That's not necessarily the reality. I'd like to see that extended to other categories as well. There's a student category that we call estrangement. It's not a term that maybe most people who are actually estranged would even recognise themselves, but that means that it's someone who doesn't have contact with their family through no choice of their own, and the kind of support that's in place just now for Care Experienced, they have a very similar characteristics to the estrangement group, who are have a lot of similar vulnerabilities because of that presumption of family support that's there. So I would really like to see that Care Experience grant that's delivered by SAS at the moment, funded by the Scottish Government, be extended to groups such as that in future as well.
Yeah, I like this last bit that John Swinney said, because I didn't read you the whole quote. It says, while the figures published today are extremely encouraging, we all know that there is more to do to ensure that all our young people have the opportunity to fulfil their full potential in life and succeed regardless of their backgrounds. And I always think that's a jolly good thing if people are always thinking, well, okay, we've got this huge, great, big, wonderful statistic today, but we still want to further it. And that's what you've just said, I think, in the other things you said.
It's hugely important. The character of our nation is that we were, and this is part of the issue of the union as well over history, that our economy was very much focused on manufacturing. It was very much focused on industry. It didn't have enough diversification within it, and then as people of your age and older will know that the crippling economic reforms that were kind of forced onto Scotland, almost as a kind of an example really of what happens when something's forced on us economically that we don't want. That's created a huge socioeconomic inequality within the country. And if you look at the map, the SIMD map it's called, it's the Indices of Multiple Deprivation, you can see that challenge there, which is reflective of the socioeconomic issues that are brought about with the kind of movement towards a more kind of neoliberal service-based economy. And some of the issues that brings about is not having a diverse enough economy. When you add Brexit into the equation as well, it has a risk of undoing a lot of great work that's already been done. But the agenda that's been taken forward by the Scottish Government really is focusing on giving opportunities to that generation of young people to really give them a chance to get into whatever their opportunities that they're interested in. Because the focus from my background, I've experience with university and college, but there's so many other opportunities as well out there, and I think that youth unemployment statistic, which shows that we have some of the lowest in Europe, that shows that it's not just our colleges and universities that are playing a role here, but also the whole wide range of options that are being there. So yeah, absolutely, just need to keep building on that, keep extending it, and keep driving forward this agenda of inclusion and progressive politics, and not let Brexit and whatever other impacts that come as a result of the Conservatives being in government on a more extreme basis down south getting in the way of that really important mission for our country.
So the next item is household numbers continue to rise. Now that means that really a lot of people are living alone, it seems, from this thing here. It says the number of households in Scotland has continued to increase to 2.48 million in 2018, according to figures published by the National Records Office of Scotland. Estimates of household and dwellings in Scotland shows that over the last 10 years, the number of households in Scotland has grown by around 139,000, which is 6%. Not quite sure what to make of that. Do you think people are lonelier now because everybody's living on their own? I mean, what's caused this? I mean, what's this all about? Do you got any ideas? Can you help me?
There is a demographic shift, and that comes down to, it comes down to so many different factors. I think actually the most important question for me is how do we make sure that our housing stock within the country is reflective of our developing needs, which is, yes, moving towards more single-based style accommodation. And that's a huge challenge. But there's a lot of work that's being delivered by the government. Was it 50,000 affordable homes that are being built? I just find it incredible that we've got to a point where we still have such high pressure within social housing in particular, and we've had previous years of government in the previous government, Labour administration, for example, back in the early days of the Parliament, returning huge amounts of money back down to London because they didn't know how to spend it, and they built, it's almost laughable, it could end up being fake news, but it is actually real that they built so few. It was like a percentage of what's being built at the moment, so the numbers are double figures in terms of,
of course,
less than 100 or something. It's just
social housing.
ridiculous.
I mean, this was a huge change when Mrs. Thatcher sold all the council houses, wasn't it? And there's not enough of it ever since then, really.
The fact that the stock is holding up so well with what's being added to it, I think, is testament as well to, again, sometimes forget some of the achievements of this government. It's been 12 years of an SNP government, maybe forget some of the great stuff that's been brought through, but ending the right to buy is clearly had a positive impact on maintaining housing stocks. And as we each year add to that, we you only need to go around Glasgow of late and see the amount of social housing that's popping up, which is really fantastic, and that has to be something that's reflected across the country.
I mean, the social housing thing is part of the problem of all this, I suppose. And using those words, defining it
one
like
of the
that.
One of the issues of social housing is that a lot of it was built, of course, like as prefabs, like post-war. It was built in a family format. Again, another policy that you just forget about, but like the bedroom tax is a living reality for people down south, and
I suppose
that's a punishing policy because the housing stock doesn't reflect the modern
way of living.
Modern way of living.
But of course, they used to call them council houses, didn't they? And it had a particular, and they were built for the workers.
Yeah. Well,
ordinary folk.
That was a big decision. That
Not
was
just
taken,
for poor people; they're built for anybody.
A big decision that was taken down in Glasgow was to move all of the housing stock out of the control of the local authority. I've been down here for a few years, so I don't necessarily have a view for the majority of whether or not it's a good or a bad thing. But certainly there are examples of some housing where I think it might have been better run under the local authority.
Yeah.
But that was a decision.
Maybe Tony Blair has something to do with that social housing thing. It's kind of a term that from his era, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. But if you look at Glasgow, there is no council housing.
Yeah.
They took it into.
There's an interesting thing that I heard today, and that's the demographics. And of course, a lot of these single people dwellings are older folk. I think in Dumfries and Galloway they were talking of. And the number of people who've moved into the 75 and over bracket is quite enormous. I think there's 150,000 people, they said, within this particular group. And then, of course, the next group down, the kind of the 65s and up, the 40 to 65 was it, off the top of my head. But the younger people, the people who do work, that bracket in the middle with the 40 years old and what you call the middle age, I don't know what you call it. Well, but there's definitely a move because of older folk being available to take up this housing stock as being single place housing.
Yeah, but how many joint housing will you find where it's effectively operates as single housing? People who share flats. The cost of living is such that it's really difficult for someone of my age, for example, to have their own place. So you have to share housing. But were it more affordable, I would probably have my own place, and I'm sure many young people I know would much prefer to have their own.
You'd like about your own place, in other words.
Well,
I'm sure you love your flatmates.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. But I think there is another story in there as well, just about the cost of living for young people. It's so disproportionately high, particularly when you look at cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh. And whilst it gets a little bit quieter over the summer, when it kicks in from the student period again, there appears to be like a kind of imbalance of power as well between people who are able to let their properties and the people that are renting them as well. So
it comes a big disparity.
The cost.
Would you like it if you could rent a nice little council house today for your own?
Absolutely.
For your home.
Yeah, I probably would, but it's just something for me that I think there's still a whole amount of work to do to really bring up the council or social housing stock to a level that is going to kind of meet the demands. So I'm not by any means like in a kind of greatly paid like circumstances, but I would almost kind of feel that maybe. I know a number of people that probably feel this way, that they wouldn't necessarily apply for that because they feel that there might be other people that really kind of need that more than maybe myself. But an ideal scenario would be for us to, I think, move to a more kind of Nordic style approach for the Nordic countries, where there is a lot more of a kind of social housing provision, and that is kind of widely available and well supported, and that plays into. I
suppose you might say homes for workers. But then work is defined. We be careful because we go down a completely different route, and we don't want to do that. But work is such a different thing these days, isn't it? When you say homes for workers, it almost thinks with the coal miners and the steel workers. But that's moved on now. The workers are defined in other ways, I suppose.
Well, when you're a worker in the gig economy, as they call it, I call it the 0-hour contract economy. When you're not even sure that you're going to get paid any wages through the week. What's a worker's home in that regard? Yeah. Where you don't actually have enough money to
How do you get the credentials to get yourself a contract, a lease contract? Yeah. Because it's very difficult if you're on a 0 hours
for a huge number of sectors, we're moving more towards this kind of. Again, there's all these kind of nice phrases like the fluid economy and the gig economy, but for workers, on the ground, they see like the real term impact on their ability to project what their wages are going to be. So, what's a worker's house when a worker doesn't know what their income's going to be week to week? So that's a huge issue that needs to be looked at as well.
To me, I think a lot of people of my generation certainly would prefer to be kind of secure and have maybe just a modest income than to have a huge, great income and be very unsure about where it was going to come from every week. Is that the case now?
Well, I don't think it's. I'm not having to worry about being offered a huge income, and I think the real issue is on the other side. There's many people in this society who don't know where their next meal is going to come from. We've got this move towards the kind of unemployed employed, where there's people who are kind of technically in work, but they're working in precarious hospitality service, for example. You only have to see the campaigns from Better Than Zero and from Unite, where they highlight almost on a monthly basis employers up and down the country. We've seen it in Dundee, Edinburgh, Glasgow and beyond, where we have a hospitality working environment where the jobs are precarious, where people's income in some cases is not being paid out. So, how do you plan for your income when that's your working environment, and we are still living under a very incompassionate UK welfare system, which does all its best to try and not provide support to people that need it.
Yeah, I actually think now we've got into this, Gary, we could do a whole programme about that, because there's a lot of stuff else that comes into my head about the social aspects of this and how we cope with those, with all of that. But I think probably this next, let's just check what I've got here. Oh, right. We've got another story here from France now, and this is Joe Fitzpatrick, the public health minister. He's been over to Paris, to the Gare du Nord, and he's gone to the city's in Paris. There, he's gone to the city's first safer consumption room. It was opened in 2016, and now it's got 1,200 registered users, and apparently people can safely do their drugs there. Mr. Fitzpatrick said this: today's visits provides an invaluable insight into how medically supervised safer drug consumption facilities can work. These sorts of centres exist around the world, including France, Australia, Denmark and Canada. What Scotland faces in terms of drug-related deaths is an emergency, and I am convening an expert group to advise on what further changes and in practice in the law could help save lives and reduce harm. Indeed, yesterday I had to pick up some prescription medicines for myself, and there was certainly a group of people there waiting for methadone and such. I mean, what do you think of all this?
Well, look, this is one issue that really doesn't need to be politicised, and we don't need moralising on it as well. This is, I think, another example of how Scotland can look at the best practice in Europe, and if we're not leading on it, as we often do, then we should apply it. So there's no doubt in my mind that the Scottish Government, and I would like to think Glasgow City Council, if its proposed safe consumption centre would be going ahead, if it weren't for the challenges that are being posed by an external government, that's the UK government. What we see in the evidence, what we see from these examples, and it's not just on this topic. If you see it in other issues such as homelessness provision with the Housing First kind of principle, which is provide the support unequivocally and provide a wraparound provision of support around it as well. That does reduce harm, and it does reduce the worst effects of harm. So a safe consumption facility, it does sound like something which should be adopted here in Glasgow and across Scotland. And such a facility, it shouldn't just be, in my mind, just a room where someone goes to consume, though that does have its benefits because they're able to be monitored as they do it. But it also should include, a wraparound provision as well, which is, access to support, various forms of support, advice on how to get financial support, advice on, well-being, mental health, housing, whatever. These people are coming to a point of contact service, and once they're in that network, that should be used to deploy as much support that can be there to help those individuals, so that they don't have to continue coming to such a facility. So some of the moralising that we've seen, particularly in this leadership election for the Conservative Party,
a lot of that moralisation comes from the south, isn't it?
It's really disappointing, I think, because actually such a policy should be in place across the UK. And this,
do you think they actively put up some barriers to us doing this?
What I was going to say there is, what we do have is, a Tory party that's already in throes to the kind of extreme fringes within this country, but also we're seeing, as a result of this leadership election, people moving to really kind of extreme wings of the party and trying to play up their votes. So add all that on top of the challenges that we're already facing with Brexit, with all these Tory politicians that want to kind of outdo each other, stumbling over each other to show
drugs themselves,
to show how
according to the newspapers I've read.
Well, yeah, there has been that issue as well, but I just think this is an issue that doesn't need moralising. It doesn't need to be politicised. The evidence is there, and hopefully this is something that could be taken ahead.
Yeah, and also maybe a step back from criticising folk for that you don't know the circumstance of why they decided to do this in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And, people do get themselves into a spot, and life is not an easy thing.
Well, if we're going to be a compassionate society that tries to help people, we need to have support provision just like this, and the evidence says that it works. And if we look not just in this issue, but any topic in which we have learnt a lesson from the rest of Europe, things like the baby box, Housing First, we take those policies and we apply them in Scotland, and we're seeing that they're having positive impacts. So I say that let's continue, and let's get our policies that we're leading on here in Scotland and get selling them out in Europe, which we are doing. But
listen, Gary, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. You've got such a wealth of knowledge, and you present what you present in a very fine and clear way. So I thank you, and hope that the viewers have enjoyed that too. So to turn to you, my beloved viewers, I thank you very much for watching all Broadcasting Scotland's shows. You will find all, I think virtually all, these shows that have been produced by this organisation for the last, well, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. I think it was 2014 that the station started. So you can go back and you can wade through all that stuff, and you'll find extraordinary knowledge there. But in order to continue this service and to make it thrive, and of course a lot of you watching now will be people who subscribe to our station. We thank you very much for that. We do need more. I'm sorry, but we just do. We haven't got the BBC license money. We don't have advertising money as the ITV stations. We can't put your arm up behind your back and threaten you with anything over your head to give us money. But we do try very, very hard to give you something that's interesting and different and from a Scottish perspective. And the people who appear on the station, we do this for love. We don't do it for money. Gary would like some money, but he hasn't got any money from us tonight. And but just to keep the lights on and keep all the bits and pieces, it takes an enormous amount. So if you have got any feeling towards that, and you can, and obviously if you haven't got any money, you cannot do this. Just watch us for free. But if you are in a position to tell, if you've got a position to tell others about us or to bring people to this station, we'd like to become the premier broadcasting organisation for Scotland when it becomes independent. But at the moment, we've got to get along the best way we can. We've got a fantastic studio. We've got fantastic people who help us. And we thank you very much for watching tonight. And we hope that you'll be with us again as soon as we got another programme for you. So. And that should be tomorrow. Bye-bye.